In front of more than 50 guests, my son-in-law smirked and pointed at me. "You're just an old man living off a pension. What makes you think you still deserve anyone's respect?" I looked him straight in the eye and calmly replied, I always thought an educated man would know how to speak to someone old enough to be his father." The entire backyard fell silent. His face flushed with embarrassment. He stormed toward me, clenched his fist, and shouted, "Say one more word, and I'll break your arm right here." He had no idea. That was the biggest mistake of his life. If you found your way here today, I'm glad you did. Take a second to subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? It means more than you know. Some elements of this story are fictional, shaped for entertainment and life lessons. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one I hope stays with you. In front of more than 50 guests, my son-in-law smirked and pointed at me. "You're just an old man living off a pension. What makes you think you still deserve anyone's respect?" I looked him straight in the eye and calmly replied, "I always thought an educated man would know how to speak to someone old enough to be his father." The entire backyard fell silent. His face flushed with embarrassment. He stormed toward me, clenched his fist, and shouted, "Say one more word, and I'll break your arm right here." He had no idea. That was the biggest mistake of his life. CTA. If you found your way here today, I'm glad you did. Take a second to subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? It means more than you know. Some elements of this story are fictional, shaped for entertainment and life lessons. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one I hope stays with you. Looking back now, I can trace the exact moment borrowing stopped being borrowing. It was not dramatic. It never is with people like Trevor. It happened in small steps, each one just reasonable enough that you told yourself you were overreacting, each one just comfortable enough that you let it go one more time. And then one day, you looked around and realized the line had moved so far you could not even see where it used to be. 6 months after the lawnmower disappeared into Trevor's garage, he knocked on my door again. Sunday afternoon, football on in the background. "Hey Gerald, you still got that old toolbox in the garage, the red Craftsman one?" I did. That toolbox had been with me for over 30 years. I carried it through 4 duty stations. I used it to fix everything in this house, from leaking pipes to busted window frames. Every tool in it was worn in exactly the right places because I had put in the hours to wear them. "I just need to borrow the socket set," Trevor said. "Got a thing with the car. Won't take long." I brought out the whole box. It was easier that way. 8 months later, I was at a cookout at Trevor and Paula's place. One of Trevor's friends, heavy-set guy named Cody Loud Laugh, was standing in the garage doorway admiring my Craftsman box sitting on Trevor's workbench. "Dude, that is a serious set," Cody said, running his hand along the top drawer. "Where'd you get that?" Trevor did not even hesitate. He crossed his arms, tilted his chin up with the satisfied pride of ownership. "Been building that up over the years. You pick up good stuff when you know what to look for." My toolbox. My 30 years. His story. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. I turned and walked to the drink cooler and did not say a word, because Paula was standing 5 feet away, and I did not want to make a scene at her home. But my hands were shaking as I opened that Coke can. The television came next. We had an older flat screen in the guest room, perfectly good, just not the size Dorothy wanted for that space anymore. Trevor heard us mention it and showed up the next afternoon with his pickup truck already running. "You sure you don't need it?" he asked, already lifting it. Go ahead, I said. 3 weeks later, I walked through their house to use the bathroom and glanced into the bedroom. My television was mounted on the wall above a gaming console, controllers on the nightstand, a half-eaten bag of chips on the dresser. Guest room TV. Now a gaming screen. Dorothy touched my arm gently on the way home. She had seen it too. Neither of us said anything right then, but her fingers pressed into my forearm just a little too tight. Then came the parking spot. Our garage fits 2 cars. Has always fit 2 cars. Dorothy drives a white Camry. I drive a dark blue F-150. We have parked them side by side in that garage since 1998. One Tuesday morning, I came downstairs to find Trevor's black Silverado filling the left bay. He had pulled in sometime after midnight, apparently decided the driveway at his place was too far to walk, and helped himself. My truck sat in the driveway in November. Georgia weather windshield fogged over a thin skin of frost on the hood. I knocked on their door. Trevor answered in a t-shirt, coffee in hand, genuinely unbothered. Trev, that's my garage bay. Come on, Pops. He sipped his coffee. It's just a parking spot. You're retired? Where are you even going at 7 in the morning? I looked at him for a long moment. My chest felt like something was sitting on it. That is not the point, I said. He shrugged. I'll move it later. He closed the door. He moved it 4 days later. Then took it again the following week. And the week after that. Dorothy started going out early to warm her Camry up by hand, in the cold, rubbing her hands together, breath fogging in the air, too kind to say a word about it. I watched her from the kitchen window one morning. This woman who had never complained about a single hard thing in our 39 years together, standing in 40-degree weather because our son-in-law had decided our garage was more convenient than his. Something settled in my chest that morning, not hot, not loud. Cold and quiet and permanent. A man who takes your parking spot will eventually try to take everything else. I just did not know yet how much everything else was going to cost us. Dorothy had a garden. 12 years she had been growing that garden along the south side of our backyard. Tomatoes, bell peppers, 3 kinds of herbs she would dry and keep in small labeled mason jars on the kitchen shelf. Every spring she would spend a full Saturday on her knees in the dirt, pressing seeds into the soil with her thumbs, humming something low and soft to herself. I used to lean against the back door frame with my coffee and watch her. It was one of my favorite things in the world. Gerald, come look at this one. She would call out, holding up a tomato the size of her fist face, lit up like a child at Christmas. This is the biggest one yet. I think it's the new fertilizer. It's because you talk to them, I always told her. They grow for you specifically. She would laugh and wave me off, but she was smiling for the rest of the day. Trevor started taking from the garden the same way he started taking everything else, gradually, casually, as if the thought of asking permission had simply never occurred to him. The first time Paula mentioned it. Mom, I hope you don't mind Trevor grabbed some tomatoes this morning for a salad he was making for his friends. Dorothy looked up from the stove. Her expression was careful, measured. He could have asked honey. It's just tomatoes, Mom. Paula's voice had that particular flatness it had developed over the past year. Not rude exactly, just sealed off like a window painted shut. You have so many. Dorothy did not push back. She turned back to the stove. But I saw her jaw tighten just slightly. After that, Trevor helped himself whenever he felt like it. Bell peppers for a party. Herbs for something he was cooking. Entire bunches of rosemary Paula said she needed for a recipe. Dorothy never said a word directly to Trevor. She would come inside after checking the garden, and I would see it in the set of her shoulders, that particular kind of quiet that meant she was absorbing something painful and choosing not to show it. Then came the electricity bill. In January of 2021, our Georgia power bill came in at $263. Our average was usually around $130. I checked everything in the house. New LED bulbs throughout. Thermostat the same as always. Nothing had changed on our end. I walked the property on a Saturday afternoon and found it within 5 minutes. Trevor had run an extension cord from the outlet on the side of our house, the outdoor one near the garden gate, through a gap in the fence all the way to his driveway, where his black Silverado sat plugged in and charging. I stood there looking at that orange extension cord for a long moment. My back teeth pressed together hard enough to ache. I went next door and knocked. Trevor opened the door with his phone in his hand, thumb still scrolling. Trevor, that outlet on the side of my house, that's my electricity. My bill doubled this month. He looked up slowly like I had interrupted something important. "Ah, come on, Gerald. We're family. You're not going to charge family for electricity, are you?" He tilted his head and smiled easy and unbothered. "That'd be a little embarrassing, don't you think?" I looked past him into the living room. Paula was sitting on the couch with a book. She had heard every word. I could tell by the stillness of her shoulders. "Paula." My voice came out steady, though my chest felt like it was full of gravel. "You want to weigh in on this?" She turned a page. "Dad, it's really not a big deal. We'll figure it out." She did not look up from her book. I drove home with both hands tight on the steering wheel and my jaw aching from clenching it the whole 4-minute drive around the block. I sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. Dorothy was at the kitchen sink when I walked in. She took one look at my face. "What happened?" "Nothing," I said. "I handled it." She dried her hands slowly on the dish towel, watching me. "Gerald." "I'm fine, Dorothy." She put the towel down and came over and put both her hands flat on my chest, the way she had done since we were young. Her eyes searched my face. "We're going to be okay," she said quietly. "You hear me?" I covered her hands with mine. They felt small and warm, and I held on to them longer than I needed to. "I hear you," I told her. But standing there in our kitchen, I was starting to understand something I had been refusing to look at directly. The problem was not the extension cord. The problem was not the tomatoes or the toolbox or the parking spot. The problem was that every time I looked to Paula to draw a line, she turned a page in her book instead, and I was running out of ways to pretend that did not break my heart. Then Noah came into the world, and for a little while everything felt like it might be okay again. Paula called us at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March of 2017. Dorothy grabbed the phone off the nightstand before the second ring, sat straight up in bed, and the second she heard Paula's voice, she pressed her free hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled up so fast, I thought something had gone wrong. "He's here," Paula said. "He's healthy. He's perfect." Dorothy made a sound I had not heard from her in years, something between a laugh and a sob, high and overwhelmed and completely unguarded. She grabbed my arm with her free hand and squeezed. I felt it in my shoulder. We were at the hospital within 40 minutes. I held Noah for the first time in a rocking chair beside Paula's bed. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Wrapped tight in a striped hospital blanket, eyes squeezed shut, face scrunched like he was still deciding whether the outside world was worth the trouble. Dorothy stood beside me with both hands clasped under her chin, tears sliding freely down her face. My hands were shaking. I had held rifles and combat fixed engines in the field-built structures with nothing but raw materials and stubbornness, and this 7-pound person made my hands shake, like I had never held anything fragile before. "Hi there," I said quietly. "I'm your grandfather. You can call me Grandpa." He yawned. His whole face moved with it. Dorothy laughed through her tears. He already has your attitude. From that morning forward, Noah became the center of our world. And it did not take long before he became our responsibility as well. At first, the arrangement seemed reasonable enough. Trevor and Paula both worked full schedules, childcare was expensive, and we lived 20 feet away. Just a few hours on Tuesdays, Paula said early on. Then Tuesdays became Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thursdays grew into most of the week. By the time Noah was 18 months old, Dorothy and I were the ones getting him up in the mornings, feeding him breakfast, taking him to his pediatric checkups, reading him his bedtime stories on the nights Trevor and Paula had dinner plans. I did not resent a single moment with that boy. Let me be absolutely clear about that. Teaching Noah things the names of every tool in my garage, how to water Dorothy's tomatoes without drowning the roots, how to identify the different birds at the feeder on our back porch. Those were the best hours of my retirement. Grandpa. Noah was 3 years old, standing on his step stool at my workbench, holding a rubber mallet with both hands. Is this the one that fixes things? That one's for persuading things, I told him. He looked at the mallet very seriously. What's persuading? It means asking something a little louder. He thought about that. Then he nodded like it made complete sense and went back to work. But there was a night in November of that year that I have never fully let go of. Noah woke at 2 a.m, running a fever of 103. Dorothy got to his room, pressed her lips to his forehead, came to the doorway and said one word, Gerald. I called Paula's cell, straight to voicemail. I called Trevor's. 4 rings, then voicemail. Dorothy and I worked through the night. Cold washcloth on his forehead, children's Tylenol every 4 hours, Dorothy singing softly in the rocking chair, while I sat on the floor beside her, with my back against the wall, watching his little chest rise and fall until the fever broke at around 5 a.m. Trevor called back at 7:48. Hey, sorry, had my phone on silent. How's the little guy? My hand tightened around the phone. Dorothy was asleep in the rocking chair with Noah curled against her chest, her cheek resting on top of his head. I looked at the two of them before I answered. He's okay, I said. Fever broke a couple hours ago. Oh, good. Yeah, we had a late night. Trevor yawned audibly into the phone. We'll come grab him after breakfast. Paula wants to sleep in a little. I did not respond right away. There was something moving through me that I had no clean word for not quite anger, not quite grief. Something heavier than both. Sure, I said finally. He'll be here. I set the phone down on the nightstand. Noah stirred in Dorothy's arms, blinked his eyes open, looked straight at me. Grandpa, he said, voice still rough with sleep. You stayed. I stayed, buddy, I told him. Grandpa's always here. He closed his eyes again. Dorothy's hand moved slowly across his back, and I sat there on that floor in the early morning quiet, wondering when exactly the word family had stopped meaning the same thing to all of us. The summer of 2023, I had an idea. Dorothy had always wanted to see Savannah. For as long as I could remember, she kept a small stack of travel magazines on her nightstand, and the ones about coastal Georgia were the most dog-eared, the most worn at the corners. She never pushed for it. That was Dorothy's way. She wanted things quietly, tucked them away neatly, and waited to see if anyone noticed. I noticed. I booked 4 nights at a hotel on River Street, a suite with a balcony view of the water. I planned the drive down, mapped out the squares, found a restaurant that had been open since 1945, that Dorothy had circled in one of those magazines with a red pen years ago. I was going to make it right. All of it, the parking spot, the electricity bill, the garden, the toolbox. One good trip could not fix those things, I knew that. But I wanted to give Dorothy something that was just hers. I told Paula about it over the phone. "That sounds amazing, Dad," she said. Then after a pause, "We were actually thinking of getting away that same weekend too. Could we come along? Noah would love the beach." I should have said no. Looking back, I understand that clearly. But she was my daughter, and I still believed in some stubborn corner of my chest that shared time might close the distance that had been growing between us. "Of course," I said. "The more the merrier." Trevor booked himself and Paula into a room on a different floor. The drive down was 4.5 hours. Dorothy and I sat in the back seat of Trevor's Suburban, with Noah buckled between us and 3 suitcases stacked in the cargo area behind our heads. Trevor and Paula sat up front, with the seats all the way back, Paula with a neck pillow. Trevor with his AirPods in from the moment we hit the highway. Noah fell asleep on Dorothy's shoulder within the first hour. She stroked his hair and looked out the window at the pine trees flashing past, and I watched the side of her face and thought about all the road trips we had taken when Paula was small. How Dorothy used to play the alphabet game and sing off-key to the radio and pass back goldfish crackers in a little plastic bag. Now she sat in the back seat of her son-in-law's truck, like a passenger in her own life. At dinner the first night, Trevor picked up the menu and ordered without looking at the prices. Seared duck, a $32 appetizer, a bottle of wine I did not catch the name of, but caught the number when the bill came. He ordered for Paula too, which she did not seem to notice. Dorothy ordered the shrimp and grits. I ordered the same. When the check arrived, Trevor slid it directly across the table to me without a word. No discussion, no hesitation. Just a smooth, practiced motion, like we had an arrangement nobody had bothered to tell me about. I paid it. Dorothy's hand found mine under the table and squeezed once. The second day, I had planned a walk through Forsyth Park, the fountain, the oak trees, the Spanish moss. Dorothy had a photo of that fountain cut out and pinned to the corkboard in our kitchen. We had looked at it together more times than I could count. Noah woke up cranky. Trevor decided a cranky Noah meant the whole group should stay close to the hotel. "We don't want to drag him around in the heat," he said, stretched out on a lounge chair by the hotel pool phone balanced on his stomach. Dorothy stood at the window of our room that afternoon, looking out at the city. I came and stood beside her. "We could still go," I said quietly. "Just the two of us. Noah could stay with—" "It's fine, Gerald." Her voice was soft but final. She put her hand on the glass. "We'll see it another time." We did not see it another time. The last night after Noah was asleep and Trevor and Paula had gone to their room, Dorothy and I sat on our balcony with the door cracked so we could hear Noah if he stirred. The river was dark and slow below us, lit up by the bridge lights in long golden streaks across the water. Dorothy had a glass of sweet tea. I had nothing. We sat there for a long time listening to the water. "Gerald," Dorothy said finally. Her voice was careful, like she was picking up something breakable. "When was the last time just the two of us sat somewhere like this? Quiet. Just us." I looked at her profile in the low light, the silver in her hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes that I had watched appear over 39 years and loved every single one of. "I can't remember, Dorothy," I said. "I honestly can't remember." She nodded slowly, looking back at the water. We did not say anything else for a long time. We did not need to. 39 years gives you a language that does not require words, and what we said to each other that night on that balcony without speaking was that something had to change. I just did not know yet how far I was willing to go to change it. We had been back from Savannah 3 weeks when Dorothy finally said out loud what we had both been carrying since the balcony. It was a Wednesday evening in October. Paula came over for what she called a quick visit. She did that occasionally, usually when she needed something from the pantry or wanted to drop Noah off for an hour. But that evening, she came in and sat down at the kitchen table and poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher we kept by the sink. And there was something different in the way she moved. Slower, like she was bracing for something. Dorothy set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat down across from her daughter. I stayed in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, close enough to hear, far enough to let them have it. Paula. Dorothy began, her voice low and warm, the way it always was when she was trying not to hurt someone. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking about things that have been going on for a while now. She wrapped both hands around her cup. We love you. We love Noah more than anything in this world. But the way things have been, the borrowing, the electricity, the garden, the parking, us, watching Noah nearly every day without anyone asking, honey, we feel like we've been taken for granted. And I think Trevor needs to. Paula set her glass down on the table. The sound was not loud, but it was deliberate. Mom. Her voice had that painted shut quality I had come to dread. I really wish you wouldn't do this. Dorothy's hands tightened around her cup. I'm your mother. I need to be able to say these things to you. Trevor works incredibly hard. Paula's jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on the table. You don't see what he deals with every day. The pressure he's under. He's doing his best. His best. Dorothy's voice cracked on the second word just slightly. Paula, I had a garden I spent 12 years building. He picked it clean without asking. He used our electricity for months. He takes Gerald's parking space in the winter, and your father doesn't say a word because he doesn't want to start something. We watch your son, who we love nearly every day. And not once, not one single time has Trevor looked us in the eye and said thank you. Paula stood up from the table. Her chair scraped back hard. I can't keep having this conversation. Every time I come over here, it turns into this. Sit down, Paula. Dorothy's voice rose just enough to carry weight. She pushed back from the table and stepped toward her daughter, one hand reaching out. I'm not finished. Your father and I are not getting any younger, and I need you to hear. Paula turned sharply, one arm swinging out to create space between them. It was not a strike. I believe that. Her hand caught Dorothy on the upper arm as Dorothy was stepping forward, and the momentum was wrong. Dorothy's foot caught the table leg, and she went down hard against the corner of the kitchen counter. The sound of it went through me like a voltage. Dorothy. I was across the room in 2 steps. My knees hit the floor beside her. She was sitting against the cabinet, one hand pressed to her upper arm, face white, eyes wide. Are you hurt? Dorothy, look at me. I'm all right. Her voice was shaking. Gerald, I'm all right. Her arm was going to bruise. I could already see the red mark blooming beneath her sleeve. I helped her up slowly, my arm around her back, and I could feel her trembling against me. Paula had not moved. She stood at the edge of the kitchen, one hand over her mouth, eyes wet and wide. For one moment, one single suspended moment, I saw the little girl I had raised looking back at me, horrified, wanting to take it back. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down at it, and the moment passed. I didn't mean that wasn't. Her voice broke off. She picked up her phone. I have to go. Trevor's asking where I am. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle. Paula Marie. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Not a shout. Not a plea. Something colder and more final than either. She stopped. You are not the little girl I raised anymore. I looked at my daughter standing in my kitchen doorway, and I meant every word down to the bone. I don't know who you've become. Her shoulder blades pulled together like she had been struck. She stood there for 3 full seconds without moving. Then she walked out and closed the door behind her. Dorothy leaned into my chest. I held her there in the kitchen, one hand on the back of her head, and I felt her take one long, shuddering breath that was not quite a cry, but was everything that came before one. Outside the window, through the gap in the curtains, I could see Noah's silhouette on the couch next door. Alone. Lit blue by the television. 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. I held Dorothy tighter and did not say a word, because there was nothing left to say that the silence had not already made perfectly clear. Dorothy was asleep by 10. I had helped her to bed, checked her arm one more time. The bruise had come purple and wide just below the shoulder, and pulled the blanket up around her, the way she liked, tucked in at the sides. She reached up and held my hand for a moment, before her eyes closed. Stay close tonight, she murmured. I'm not going anywhere, I told her. I sat in the chair beside the bed until her breathing evened out. Then I got up, slowly went to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. I did not want tea. I just needed something to do with my hands. I stood at the counter while the water heated and looked around the kitchen at the mason jars of dried herbs on the shelf at the corkboard, beside the refrigerator with its layered collection of photos and notes and grocery lists, at the small framed cross-stitch above the window that Dorothy's mother had made for us as a wedding gift. 39 years of a life built in this room. 39 years of Sunday breakfasts and sick days and homework and holidays and every ordinary Tuesday that makes up the actual fabric of a marriage. I turned the kettle off without pouring anything. I walked to the hall closet and pulled down the blue photo album from the second shelf. I took it to the kitchen table and sat down and opened it. The first photograph was Paula at 2 years old, sitting in a cardboard box in the living room of our old apartment in Augusta, grinning the enormous gap-toothed grin of a child who has just discovered that a box is the greatest invention in human history. Dorothy was kneeling beside the box, laughing, one hand braced on the floor. I remembered taking that picture. I remembered the exact weight of that cheap, disposable camera in my hand. I turned the page. Paula at 8, standing in the doorway of her bedroom, the one I had built for her. I had spent 3 weekends on that room. Painted the walls the particular shade of pink she had picked out herself from a fan of color swatches at the hardware store, holding each one up to the window light with the absolute seriousness of a person making a permanent decision. I had built the shelving unit along the back wall from raw pine, sanded it, smooth painted it white to match the trim. I had put up the little reading light above the headboard because she liked to read before sleeping, and I did not want her straining her eyes. The morning I finished, I brought her in with her eyes covered. She walked in with her hands over her face, peeking through her fingers, and when she finally saw it, she let out a sound that I can only describe as pure a child's version of joy that has not yet learned to hold anything back. She threw her arms around my neck so hard my hat fell off. "Daddy, it's perfect," she said into my shoulder. "It's exactly perfect." I pressed my thumb against the corner of that photograph for a long time. I turned more pages. Paula at 15 in the dress Dorothy had saved 6 months to buy her the pale blue one for the school formal. The one Dorothy had pointed out in a store window in October and quietly set money aside for every week until February when the formal came around. Paula had not known. She had opened the garment bag and screamed with happiness and spun around the living room and hugged Dorothy so tight, Dorothy laughed and told her to watch the pins. There were no photos from that day with Dorothy in them. Paula had taken pictures with her friends outside the school gymnasium. Not one with her mother. I ran my finger along the edge of that page. There was a photograph near the back of the album that I had almost forgotten. Paula's college graduation, June of 2009. She was in her cap and gown, arms around my neck, face flushed with pride and relief. Beneath it, in my own handwriting in blue pen, Paula's promise, June 2009. She had stood in front of our whole family that day. Dorothy's sister, my brother Carl, 4 aunts and uncles, and a table full of cousins, and she had turned to me and said it clearly enough for every single one of them to hear. "Dad." Her voice had been steady and full. "I promise you, when you and Mom get older, I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me. I promise." Dorothy had covered her mouth with both hands. My brother Carl had started clapping. I had not trusted my voice to respond, so I had simply pulled Paula in and held her. That photograph was still hanging on the living room wall, right where I had put it 15 years ago. I closed the album. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and felt the full weight of everything settle onto my chest. Not as anger, not as grief, but as something older and heavier than both. The specific ache of a person who loved without condition and learned too late and too clearly that love given without limit is not always love returned in kind. I put my hand flat on the cover of the album. I gave her everything I had. I said aloud to the empty kitchen, to Dorothy asleep down the hall, to 39 years of this life we had built together. Everything. The kitchen clock ticked. I stood up, put the album on the counter, and made a decision that had been building for months, maybe years, but that I had kept pushing back because I was a father, and fathers are the last ones to give up. No more talking. No more waiting. It was time to start preparing. January came cold and gray to Marietta. From the outside, nothing had changed. I still waved to Trevor over the fence on mornings he happened to be in the yard. I still watched Noah on Tuesdays, helped him with his letters, made him grilled cheese the way he liked, no crusts, cut diagonal, not straight across, because he had informed me very seriously, at age 2, that diagonal tasted better, and I had never found reason to argue. Dorothy still baked on Sundays. The house still smelled like coffee at 7 in the morning and something warm from the oven by noon. But inside I was done. The first call I made was to a family attorney named David Marsh, whose office was on Whitlock Avenue in downtown Marietta. I had driven past his sign for 15 years. I went in on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January, sat across from a man about 10 years younger than me in a gray suit, and told him what I needed. "I want to update my will," I said. "I want Paula and Trevor removed as beneficiaries. All of it, the house, the accounts, the investment portfolio. I want it restructured." David Marsh looked at me for a moment over the top of his glasses. "Mr. Gerald, that's a significant change. Can I ask, is this something you've thought through carefully?" "I've been thinking about it for 2 years," I said. "And I watched my wife fall in my kitchen 3 months ago because of the people I'd be leaving things to. I've thought about it carefully enough." He nodded once, opened a legal pad and uncapped his pen. "Then let's get started. Georgia law gives a person full authority to change their will at any time, with or without notifying their beneficiaries. No warning required. No explanation owed." I signed the new documents on the 3rd of February and drove home with a copy in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. I felt lighter than I had in years. The second thing I did was start photographing. I went through the garage first. The empty space where my Husqvarna had lived. The bare workbench where my Craftsman toolbox used to sit. I opened the chest where I kept my spare extension cords and photographed the gap where the heavy-duty outdoor one had been. I walked through the house, the guest room where the television had been the kitchen, where I checked the pantry items Paula had helped herself to over the years. Every photograph was dated automatically by my phone. Everyone went into a folder I labeled Home Inventory November 2019 to present. It took 3 Saturdays. By the end, I had over 200 photographs. I tried one more time with Paula. I owed her that much, or I owed it to the version of myself that had not yet fully let go. I went to her door on a Sunday afternoon in March and knocked. She answered in a sweatshirt, coffee in hand, looking at me the way you look at a delivery you were not expecting. "Dad." "Hey. What's up?" "I'd like to talk," I said. "Just the two of us. About what's been going on." Something moved across her face. Not quite guilt, not quite irritation. Something uncomfortable that lived between the two. "Dad, please don't make this into something bigger than it is. Trevor is really stressed at work right now. Can you just give it some time?" "Paula, your mother has a bruise on her arm that took 3 weeks to fade." She looked down at her coffee cup. "That was an accident." "I know it was," I said. "That's not the point I'm making, Dad." Her voice went flat. "I really can't do this right now." She stepped back from the doorway. "I'll call you, okay?" She closed the door. I stood on her front step for a moment, looking at the grain of the wood, feeling the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from loving someone who will not let you reach them. That night, I sent Paula a long message, every item on the list, every date, every incident laid out plainly and without accusation. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not her enemy. I told her I needed her to read it and respond so we could find a way forward. She read it at 11:47 that night. I saw the red receipt appear on my phone. She did not reply. The next morning at 8:15, Trevor knocked on my front door. Hard. The kind of knock that is not really a knock. I opened it. He was in his work clothes, jaw set, eyes sharp with the kind of anger that had been marinating overnight. "You got a problem with my wife, old man? You sending her messages at midnight telling her I'm some kind of... What exactly are you trying to start?" I looked at him standing on my porch in the January cold. This man who had taken my tools and my electricity and my parking space and my daughter's loyalty and now stood at my door acting as though I was the one who had crossed a line. "I texted my daughter," I said. "Not you." He stared at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he could not swallow. Then he turned and walked back down my driveway. 3 days later, Paula called to tell me Thanksgiving was going to be at our house this year. Trevor's idea, 50 people. She said it like she was letting me know about a change in the weather. Before I tell you what happened next, 50 people, one backyard, and a man who had no idea what was already waiting for him, drop a number 8 in the comments so I know you're still with me. A reminder, this story carries some fictional threads woven in for reflection. If that's not your kind of content, this is a good place to step away, no judgment at all. Trevor did not ask. He announced. That was how it had always been with him, not a question posed, not a suggestion offered, but a declaration delivered with the calm confidence of a man who had never once been told no in a way that actually stuck. Paula relayed it over the phone, her voice carrying that particular careful neutrality she had perfected over years of translating her husband's decisions into something that sounded like family discussion. "Trevor thought it would be really nice to do Thanksgiving at your place this year," she said. "You have the big backyard. It would be an outdoor cookout kind of thing. Casual." "How many people?" I asked. A pause. "Around 50. I sat with that number for a moment. 50 people in the yard Dorothy and I had planted and maintained and paid for across 3 decades. 50 people Trevor had invited to a home that was not his. Paula. I said, keeping my voice even, "Your mother and I are not running a catering operation." Dad, it's not like that. It's just family and friends. It'll be relaxed. Whose family? Whose friends? Another pause, slightly longer. It'll be fine, Dad. I'll help. She did not help. What she did 2 weeks before Thanksgiving was appear at our back gate on a Saturday morning while I was in the garage. I heard the latch click and looked up to see her walking into the yard with a pair of gardening gloves on, moving with that efficient, purposeful energy she got when she had already decided something and did not want to discuss it. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping out of the garage. Just clearing some space back here for the tables and the grill setup." She was already pulling at the edge of Dorothy's herb border, yanking up the small wooden stakes that marked the rows. "Trevor wants room for the cornhole boards, too." I felt something drop in my chest. "Paula, that's your mother's garden." "Dad, it's just some plants." She did not look up. "We need the space." "Does your mother know you're doing this?" She straightened up, pulled off one glove, looked at me with an expression I had learned to recognize, the one that was not quite dismissive, but was working hard to get there. "I'll talk to her. It's fine." Dorothy found out that evening when she went out to check the herb border and found it half dismantled, the little labeled stakes pulled and stacked in a pile near the fence. The rosemary she had been growing for 6 years uprooted and lying on its side in the dirt. She came back inside and stood in the kitchen doorway. Her face was very still. Her hands were at her sides. "Gerald," she said. Her voice did not break. It was something worse than breaking. It was the voice of a person who had run out of the energy required to fall apart. She took my rosemary. I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put my arms around her, and she pressed her forehead against my chest and took one long, slow breath. "I know," I said. "I had that plant for 6 years. I know, sweetheart." She stepped back, wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, like she was annoyed at herself for them, and turned to the sink. "Well, I suppose I'll start over in the spring." That was Dorothy, 65 years old, and she was already planning the spring planting while the dirt from her uprooted rosemary was still on her daughter's gardening gloves. The second thing I discovered that week came on a Thursday evening when I went to open the household safe in the study to retrieve our homeowner's insurance documents. I kept the combination written on a card in my wallet, something I had done for years out of habit. I turned the dial to the sequence I had used for a decade. It did not open. I tried again. Same result. I sat back in my chair and looked at the safe for a long moment, something cold and deliberate moving through my chest. I called the manufacturer's customer service line, verified ownership with the serial number and purchase receipt I kept in my filing cabinet, and had the code reset that same evening. Later, I asked Paula about it on the phone. A pause that lasted just a half second too long. I might have mentioned the combination to Trevor once. He needed to find the car insurance paperwork a few months ago when he had that fender bender. It was an emergency, Dad. He changed my combination, Paula. He probably just... I'm sure he didn't mean... He changed the combination on my safe. In my house. She went quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say, the quiet of someone choosing not to say what they were thinking. "I'll talk to him," she said finally. She did not talk to him. Or if she did, I never heard about it. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat in the kitchen alone after Dorothy had gone to bed. I pulled out the album one more time, not to look at it, just to hold it. The cover was smooth and cool under my palm. I thought about the photograph of Paula at 8 years old standing in the doorway of the room I built her. I thought about the combination on my safe. I thought about Dorothy standing in the kitchen doorway, saying she would plant again in the spring. I put the album down and looked out the window at the dark backyard, the space that would be full of Trevor's 50 guests in 12 hours. Tomorrow, I said quietly to the empty kitchen. Everything changes. Thanksgiving morning broke cold and clear over Marietta. By 8:30, the sky was the particular pale blue that Georgia gets in late November, thin and bright, and absolutely without warmth. I had been up since 6. Dorothy was in the kitchen, making her sweet potato casserole, the one she made every year, the one her own mother had taught her, the one Noah always asked for by name and ate 3 helpings of. The smell of brown sugar and cinnamon moved through the house like something that belonged to a different, quieter version of this day. You don't have to do that," I told her, coming to stand beside her at the counter. She looked up. "I know I don't have to." She pressed the back of a spoon into the top of the casserole, smoothing it even. "I want to. It's Thanksgiving, Gerald. Some things don't change just because other things do." I looked at her for a moment. This woman who had been through everything this year and was still standing at her own counter on a cold November morning, making her mother's recipe for a party she had not been consulted about, and felt something move through me that was too large and too old for me to name properly. "It's going to be a good day," I said. She glanced at me sideways. "Is it?" "Yes," I said. "One way or another." By 9 o'clock, Trevor was already in my backyard. I heard the engine of my Husqvarna before I saw him. That particular high whine of it running at full throttle, a sound I knew the way I knew my own heartbeat. I stepped out onto the back porch, and there he was, pushing my lawnmower back and forth across the section of grass nearest the fence line, cutting it low, and even for the party setup. He had rolled it from his garage where it had lived for 5 years without once being returned. "Trevor," I kept my voice level, "that is my lawnmower." He looked up, not stopping his stride. "Yeah, I know. Just getting the grass right before people show up." He raised his voice over the engine noise. "Relax, Gerald. Everything's under control." I went back inside. By 11, cars were arriving. Trevor had set up a folding table near the gate to the backyard, and he stood beside it, greeting his guests with the broad, easy confidence of a host, welcoming people into his own home. My home. My oak tree casting shade over his handshake. He had also positioned my Weber kettle grill, the 22-inch one I had owned for 11 years, at the center of the patio. He stood behind it, like a man presiding over his own domain, accepting compliments about the setup, with a modest nod that suggested he had built it himself. An older man I did not recognize leaned over the grill and said, "Man, this is a great setup. How long have you had this thing?" Trevor ran a hand along the edge of the lid. "Long enough to know what I'm doing with it," he said and smiled. My grill, his story. The first guest I was genuinely glad to see was Ray Hendricks from next door, who came through the side gate at 11:15 with a 6-pack of Sweetwater 420 and the particular calm of a man who had spent 20 years in law enforcement and knew exactly what kind of day this was shaping up to be. He found me on the porch and handed me a beer. "How you holding up, Gerald?" "Ask me again in a few hours, Ray." He looked out at the backyard, at Trevor holding court near the grill, at the 50 folding chairs arranged in clusters across the grass, at Dorothy moving quietly between the kitchen and the porch, carrying dishes she had cooked herself for guests she had not invited. Ray opened his beer and took a long drink. "I got my phone with me," he said simply. "Good camera on it." I looked at him. He looked back at me with the flat, steady expression of a man who had already made a decision and was not looking for discussion. "Okay," I said. Margaret Collins arrived shortly after, arms full of a covered dish, making a straight line for Dorothy the moment she came through the gate. Trevor had said hello to everyone else. He did not say hello to Margaret. And then there was James, a senior partner at Trevor's firm, the kind of man Trevor had spent years trying to impress, broad-shouldered fleece vest with the kind of handshake that meant something. Trevor had introduced him to me near the drink cooler. "James, this is Gerald, Paula's dad." James shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye the way fewer and fewer people seemed to do anymore. "Gerald, good to meet you. Trevor talks about you." "Does he?" I said. James held my gaze for just a beat longer than the moment required. "He does," he said evenly, and then looked away across the yard. By noon, 50 people filled my backyard. Trevor moved among them like a man at the peak of his own story. And I stood at the edge of my own porch in front of my own house beside the oak tree I had planted with my own hands and waited. The party was loud in the way that parties are loud when the joy is borrowed. People laughed at the right moments, filled their plates, moved between clusters of conversation with the easy looseness of a Saturday afternoon. Trevor worked the crowd the way he always did, hand on shoulders, big laugh top of his voice when he wanted to be heard, which was most of the time. Paula moved quietly alongside him, refilling drinks, steering people toward the food table, performing the role of gracious host in a home that belonged to her parents. Dorothy sat in the cushioned chair near the back door, the one I had put there years ago so she could be outside without standing all afternoon. Margaret Collins had arrived with a covered pan of her apple crisp and had not left Dorothy's side since. The two of them sat close together, talking in the low, unhurried way of women who have been friends long enough to not need volume. I watched from the porch and did what I had done since January. I waited. It was Margaret who started it, though she did not mean to start anything. She was the most naturally honest person I had ever known. Not blunt, not unkind, just constitutionally incapable of pretending that things were different from what they were. She leaned toward Dorothy and said loud enough to carry to the 3 people seated nearest to them, "Dorothy, I have to say, last February when you were sick, that whole week I thought for sure Paula would be over every day. I brought soup on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. I never saw her car in the driveway once." The 3 people nearest went quiet. The quiet spread outward the way quiet does when something true has been said in a public place. Dorothy's hands tightened around her sweet tea glass. "Margaret, I'm not saying it to be ugly." Margaret's voice was gentle but completely unretractable. "I'm saying I was worried about you and I kept thinking surely her daughter is handling this. And then I'd drive past, and your car would be there. Gerald and Paula's never would." Trevor was close enough to hear. I saw his jaw shift. "Hey, Margaret." His voice carried across the yard with practiced ease the tone of a man redirecting a conversation he found inconvenient. "You want some of that brisket? I smoked it myself this morning." Margaret looked at him pleasantly. "I'm fine, thank you, Trevor." She turned back to Dorothy. Noah had been playing near the back fence with 2 of Trevor's younger cousins, chasing something in the grass with the focused intensity only a 7-year-old can bring to an undefined game. He broke away from them and ran across the yard, throwing himself against my legs with enough force to make me grab the porch railing. "Grandpa." He tilted his head back to look up at me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Can I have more of Grandma's sweet potato stuff?" "You'd have to ask Grandma," I said. "She said to ask you." "Then yes." He beamed and ran back toward Dorothy's chair. One of Trevor's friends, a younger man in a Braves cap, who had been standing nearby, watched Noah go and said to no one in particular, "That kid loves his grandpa." His wife nodded. "You can just tell." He went straight to him. Trevor heard that too. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. A few minutes later, the same man in the Braves cap crouched down next to Noah and said, "Hey buddy, you know when your mom's birthday is?" Noah scrunched up his face, thinking hard. He shook his head slowly. "I don't think so." "What about your dad's?" More scrunching, another head shake. "What about Grandpa's?" Noah's face cleared completely. "November 14th, he said immediately, with the confidence of a person reciting something they have been told and retold and celebrated. "And Grandma's is March 2nd. Grandpa makes a real cake every year, from scratch, with the little flowers on top because Grandma likes flowers." The man in the Braves cap laughed and looked up at me. I kept my expression even, but felt something press behind my sternum, not quite pain, not quite pride, exactly the combination of both that only a grandchild can produce. Trevor did not laugh. Ray had positioned himself near the side fence with his sweet tea, and his phone talking easily with a couple I recognized from the end of the block. He was not obviously watching anything. But I had known Ray Hendricks for 11 years, and I knew the difference between a man who was relaxed and a man who was ready. He caught my eye once across the yard, gave me the smallest possible nod. I nodded back. Margaret, still sitting with Dorothy, had moved on to a story about her sister's kitchen renovation when she paused mid-sentence and said with the same mild, unhurried tone she used for everything, "Oh, and Dorothy, I meant to ask, how is your arm? I saw what happened through my kitchen window back in October. That looked like a bad fall." The yard did not go entirely quiet this time, but the cluster of people nearest the back door went very still. Dorothy's chin came up slightly. "It healed fine," she said. "Thank you for asking." Margaret nodded, satisfied, and returned to her sister's kitchen renovation as though she had simply been checking the weather. But the people who had gone still had heard every word. And Trevor, standing 10 feet away with a pair of tongs in his hand and a smile beginning to stiffen at the edges, had heard it too. He did not like being paid attention to for the wrong reasons. And this afternoon, the wrong kind of attention was gathering around him, the way clouds gather before a storm, quietly from every direction, without a single dramatic announcement. It was Trevor's cousin Brenda who said the thing nobody else had managed to say. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s who had driven up from Macon with her husband for the holiday, and she had the particular confidence of someone who spent her professional life. She was a middle school principal, Paula had told me once, saying difficult things to people who did not want to hear them. She had wandered into the house to use the bathroom and come back through the living room, and something on the wall had stopped her. She was still standing in front of it when I came inside to get more napkins from the hall closet. "Is this Paula?" she asked, looking at the framed photograph on the wall. Paula in her graduation cap and gown, arms around my neck, both of us caught in the middle of something too large to contain. "It is," I said. "She looks so happy." Brenda tilted her head, studying it. "There's something written underneath. Is that your handwriting?" "It is." She leaned closer and read it aloud quietly. "Paula's Promise, June 2009. She straightened up and looked at me with eyes that were doing what a good principal's eyes always do, reading more than the surface. What was the promise? I did not answer right away. Not because I did not know, but because I was deciding whether this was a door I wanted to open in my own living room on Thanksgiving afternoon. Paula had come inside behind me. She had stopped at the edge of the hallway. Brenda looked from the photograph to me, and then noticing Paula to her. "Paula, honey, what was the promise?" "It sounds like something meaningful." Paula's face shifted. The careful, neutral expression she had been wearing all afternoon developed a crack along one edge, something raw and unfinished, showing through underneath. "It was a long time ago," she said quietly. Brenda looked back at the photograph. "Promises to parents don't have an expiration date, honey. I tell my students that all the time." She said it without weight, without accusation, the way you state a thing that is simply true. Then she smiled at me, touched my arm briefly, and walked back out to the yard. The living room was very still. Paula stood in the hallway looking at the photograph. Her eyes were bright and wet at the edges, and she was pressing her lips together the way she had done since she was a little girl when she was trying not to cry. For one long moment, she looked at that picture of herself at 25, with her arms around my neck and her whole face wide open with the kind of happiness that does not know yet what it will cost. And I watched something move through her that I could not name, and that she would not let land. Then Trevor's voice came in from outside, loud and easy over the general noise. "Paula, hey, can you grab the extra napkins people are asking?" She blinked, took one breath, went to the closet, got the napkins, and walked back out without looking at me. I stood alone in my living room for a moment. Then I went outside. Trevor had gathered a group near the grill, his friends, a few cousins, James, standing slightly apart from the cluster, with his beer and his careful expression. Trevor was mid-story about something that had happened at work, performing for the audience the way he always performed, hands moving, voice rising and falling with practiced timing. I walked to where Ray was standing near the side fence. I reached into my back pocket and took out my phone. I opened the photo folder Home Inventory, November 2019 to present, and held it out to Ray without a word. Ray took the phone. He looked at the first photograph, then the second. He scrolled slowly, deliberately, the way a man scrolls when he is making sure he understands what he is looking at. His expression did not change, but his jaw set in a way I recognized from 11 years of watching him from across a fence line. He looked up at me. I looked back at him. He scrolled to the next photograph. And the next. He reached the end, 212 photographs, everyone dated, everyone labeled, and held the phone out to Margaret, who had appeared at his elbow without either of us noticing she had moved. Margaret took the phone. She looked at 3 photographs. Then she looked at Dorothy sitting in her chair across the yard, with her sweet tea and her dignity, and her 6 years of rosemary, that was now lying in a pile near the back fence. She handed the phone back to Ray. Ray looked at me and gave me one small, deliberate nod. He understood. He had understood since October. And now he was ready. From across the yard, Trevor's laugh rose above the general noise, big and self-satisfied, and completely at ease, the laugh of a man who believed he was the most important person in any room he occupied. He had no idea what was already in motion. It happened the way the worst things always happen. Not with a warning, not with a build-up you can point to afterward and say, there, that was the moment. It happened in the space between one sentence and the next, in the half-second it takes for a word to leave a man's mouth and enter the world permanently. The afternoon had softened toward evening. The light over the backyard had gone from bright to amber, and people had settled into their chairs and their conversations with the particular looseness that comes after 2 hours of food and beer. Trevor was holding court near the grill with a group of his friends, Cody, the one who had admired my toolbox 2 years ago, and 3 other men I had seen at various family gatherings, but whose names I had never been given. I was crossing the yard to refill Dorothy's sweet tea. Trevor glanced over as I passed. Something moved across his face, the particular calculation of a man reading an audience and deciding to perform. "Hey!" he called out loud enough to carry. "There he goes. Can you grab the extra propane tank from the garage while you're at it, Gerald? It's just sitting there." I stopped walking. I turned around slowly, Cody and the other men were watching now. Trevor stood with his arms crossed, weight shifted back on one heel, wearing the expression of a man who had just said something reasonable and was waiting to be agreed with. "The propane tank," I said, "is next to my workbench, in my garage." "Yeah, I know where it is." Trevor's smile did not quite reach his eyes. "That's why I'm asking you to grab it. You're heading that way anyway. You're not doing anything." The yard around us had gotten quieter. Not silent, there were still conversations happening at the far tables. Music coming from the speaker near the fence, but the cluster of people nearest to us had tuned in the way people tune in when they sense that a thing is becoming a different kind of thing. "Trevor." My voice came out even and flat. "I have been doing things in that garage since before you were born. Don't tell me what I'm not doing." His eyes sharpened. He uncrossed his arms. "You know what your problem is? Gerald." His voice had changed. The performance was gone, replaced with something that had been sitting underneath it for a long time, waiting for exactly this kind of audience. "You act like you're owed something. Like because you served, and because you built some stuff, and because you write little captions under photos that entitles you to respect you haven't earned in years." The cluster of people near the grill went completely still. James, standing slightly apart from the group with his beer held at his side, had stopped moving. Dorothy had looked up from her chair. "I built this house," I said. My voice was low, controlled, every word deliberate. "I raised this family. I served this country for 22 years. You will not use the word useless in my direction, Trevor. Not in my yard. Not in front of my family." Something ugly moved across his face. The kind of ugly that lives in a man who is accustomed to being the loudest voice in a room and has just discovered that loud is not the same as right. "Useless." He said it again slowly, like he was tasting it. "Yeah, I said it. What are you going to do about it, old man?" He took a step toward me. Just one. But it was a step with intent behind it. The step of a man who has decided that size is an argument. "You think I don't see what you are?" His voice had dropped to something that carried only to the people immediately around us, which was most of the yard. "You're a retired vet living off a pension, sitting in that house watching the world go by pretending you matter. Paula feels sorry for you, Gerald. We both do." Every muscle in my body had gone absolutely still. "Trevor." Ray's voice came from 6 feet to my left. Calm, measured with the particular authority of a man who spent 20 years deciding when situations required intervention. "I'd stop right there." Trevor glanced at Ray. Something flickered in his expression, a half-second of recalculation. Then he looked back at me and made his decision. "I'm not scared of either of you," he said. "You want to know what I think? I think you're a 67-year-old man who—" Noah came out of nowhere. He had been near the back fence, and he crossed the yard at a dead run, the way children run when something has frightened them. And the only direction that makes sense is toward the person who has always been safe. He hit my legs and wrapped both arms around them, face pressed against my thigh, whole body shaking. "Grandpa." His voice was muffled, thick with the specific terror of a child who does not understand what is happening, but understands completely that it is wrong. "Grandpa, stop." Trevor looked at his son clinging to my legs. He did not stop. "You need to handle your grandson," Trevor said, pointing a finger at Noah, "and get him out of the way. Because you and me, Gerald, we're not done." He took another step forward, hand coming up, jaw set, with the absolute certainty of a man who had never once in his life encountered a consequence he could not talk his way out of. That was the last mistake Trevor Hutchins ever made in my backyard. There are things a man learns in 22 years of military service, not the things people imagine when they hear those words. Not the dramatic things, not the things that make for good stories at a dinner table. The real things. The things that live in the body after years of training until they are no longer decisions, but simply what happens when the situation requires it. Economy of movement. Reading distance and angle and weight distribution in the time it takes to exhale. Knowing without thinking about it exactly where your feet are and where the other man's weight is committed. Trevor Hutchins had a good 50 pounds on me and 20 years. What he did not have was any understanding whatsoever of what he was walking into. I reached down and put my hand on Noah's shoulder. I looked at the young man standing near me, one of Trevor's cousins, barely 20, who had been frozen in place for the last 30 seconds. "Could you take him inside for me, please?" The young man nodded immediately, put his hands on Noah's shoulders, and gently steered him toward the back door. Noah went looking back at me over his shoulder, eyes wide and wet until the door closed behind him. I turned back to Trevor. Ray had moved to a position slightly to Trevor's left without appearing to do so. I registered it without looking directly at him. "Gerald." Ray's voice was steady and final. "You want me to handle this?" "No," I said. "I don't." Trevor watched this exchange with the contempt of a man who believed he was watching two old men decide which one of them was least afraid of him. He shook his head with a short, dismissive laugh. "This is unbelievable," he said, looking around at the yard full of people watching him. "You're both serious right now." He took the last step forward with his right hand, coming up not a precise movement, not a trained one, just the swing of a large man who has decided that the conversation is over and force is the period at the end of his sentence. He never landed it. I had spent 2 decades learning how to move inside a man's reach before the reach could find me. My left foot stepped forward, and to the outside of his plant foot, the footwork so embedded in muscle memory that it required no conscious instruction. My right hand closed around his wrist at the apex of the swing, not fighting the momentum, but redirecting it, adding to it, using the weight he had committed to that swing against the joints that were carrying it. My hip turned into him. Trevor's own forward momentum became the problem. Physics, not strength. He went down hard into the grass. Face first, both knees the air going out of him in one involuntary sound. I came down with him, one knee in the grass beside him, his right arm secured behind his back, in a position that made further movement both painful and structurally inadvisable. He tried to get up. His body would not cooperate. "Let me up," he said into the grass, voice strangled and furious. "Let me up right now." "I will," I said. "When you're done." "I am going to." "You're going to what, Trevor?" My voice had not risen by a single decibel. "You already said what you were going to do. You said it in front of 50 people. That is called a criminal threat in the state of Georgia. You advanced toward me after making that threat. That is called assault. I am a 67-year-old man who asked you to stop. You did not stop. Everything that happened after that is self-defense." He thrashed once more. His shoulder protested with a sound that made several nearby guests wince visibly. "You're breaking my arm," he hissed. "I'm not breaking anything," I said. "You'd know the difference." The yard was absolutely silent, except for the music still playing from the speaker near the fence, which had become the most absurd detail in the history of Thanksgiving. Paula was standing 8 feet away. She had both hands pressed flat against her sternum face, white eyes moving between her husband on the ground and her father kneeling in the grass beside him. For one suspended moment, one long, aching, irretrievable moment, her eyes found mine, and I saw in them the little girl from the photograph on the living room wall. Horrified, undone. Then she looked away. James had not moved from his position near the grill. He was watching Trevor on the ground with the expression of a man updating information he had suspected for some time. He looked at me once briefly and gave a small nod that contained more communication than most sentences. Trevor stopped struggling. The speaker near the fence played on. Someone had queued up something country and entirely inappropriate for the moment, and the fiddle line moved through the silent yard like it had wandered in from a completely different story. "Are you done?" I asked. A pause, long enough to cost him something. "Yeah," he said into the grass, low and abraded. "Yeah, I'm done." I released his arm and stood up. Trevor pushed himself to his knees in the grass, face flushed, deep red jaw working. He looked up at me from the ground in front of 50 people, and I watched his arrogance try to reassemble itself and fail to find all the pieces. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Trevor's face was still pressed into the memory of the grass. He had gotten to his knees, then to his feet, but the imprint of what had just happened was written all over him in ways he could not fix by straightening up. His shirt was untucked on the left side, his collar twisted and pulling wrong. There was a faint smear of dirt along one cheekbone that he had not yet noticed, and his right shoulder sat slightly lower than his left in the unconscious way of a man whose body was quietly cataloging what had just been done to it. He looked around the yard. 50 people looked back at him. Not the way they had been looking at him 3 hours ago, not with the easy social attention of guests enjoying a party. This was something else. This was the particular stillness of people who have just watched something they cannot unwatch, who are still in the process of deciding what it means and what, if anything, it requires of them. Trevor read that stillness. I watched him read it. And I watched something shift behind his eyes, the rapid internal recalculation of a man who had just discovered that the room he thought he owned had new walls. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it in both hands and dialed with the focused urgency of a man who had just located the one weapon he believed he still had. He turned slightly away from me as the line connected, dropping his voice into the register of controlled distress practiced. I thought the voice of a man who had learned early that the first person to claim victimhood holds the advantage in any room, including rooms with police officers in them. "Yes, I need police at 4471 Creekside Drive in Marietta. My father-in-law just attacked me without any provocation. He assaulted me in front of my family and my guests. He needs to be removed from the property immediately." He paused, listening, his free hand coming up to press against his own chest in a gesture of distress that I did not believe for 1 second. Then he added with careful emphasis, "He's a large man. He's dangerous. Please hurry." He ended the call and straightened up. Some of the old confidence began seeping back into his posture, the squared shoulders, the lifted chin, the particular set of a man who has pressed a button and is now waiting for the machine to do what machines are supposed to do. He looked at me across the yard with the expression of a man who believed he had just reset the board entirely. "We'll see how this goes for you," he said. I did not respond. I had nothing to say to Trevor Hutchins that had not already been said or demonstrated or documented in 212 photographs with timestamps. What Trevor did not know, what he could not have known, because he had never once in 5 years paid enough attention to the people around him to understand what they were actually capable of, was that Ray Hendricks had made his own phone call 4 minutes earlier. Not to 911. Ray had stepped quietly to the side fence during the confrontation, phone already out moving with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has spent 20 years arriving at situations ahead of the people who thought they were controlling them. He had placed a quiet call to a number he had not dialed in 2 years, a number that apparently still picked up on the second ring. He was sliding his phone back into his shirt pocket when Trevor finished his call. I looked at Ray across the yard. He picked up his sweet tea from the fence post where he had set it, took a long, unhurried drink, and looked back at me with the expression of a man who has already done what needed doing and is content to wait. Paula had moved to stand beside Trevor. She had her hand on his arm, not holding it, not gripping it with the urgency of a woman frightened for her husband, just resting there. The gesture of a woman who had chosen her position and was standing in it because she had run out of other positions to take. Her face was composed in a way that cost her something visible. I could see the cost of it in the muscles along her jaw, in the deliberate steadiness of her breathing, in the way her eyes moved to me once and then moved away and did not come back. I thought about the graduation photograph on the living room wall. Paula's promise. June 2009. I thought about a lot of things in those 11 minutes. Dorothy had not moved from her chair near the back door. Margaret sat beside her with one hand resting over Dorothy's, on the armrest, not speaking, not filling the space with reassurance that neither of them needed. Just present the way Margaret had always been present throughout this entire long year, solidly without fanfare in the exact place she was needed without being asked. Dorothy's chin was up. Her eyes were dry. She held her sweet tea glass with both hands and looked at the yard with the expression of a woman who had absorbed a great deal and was still, despite all of it, upright. The yard had settled into a strange suspension. People stood or sat in loose clusters, voices, low conversations that had started and then stopped and not quite restarted. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was pretending this was still a party. The speaker near the fence had been turned off by someone with enough sense to read the room. I never found out who, but I was grateful for it. The police arrived 11 minutes after Trevor's call. 2 cruisers pulled up along Creekside Drive. I heard the engines first, then saw the light bar reflection moving across the garage door. 2 officers came through the side gate with the careful scanning attention of people walking into a situation they have been given incomplete information about and are rapidly trying to complete. The taller of the 2, Officer Dan Kowalski, according to the nameplate above his left pocket, took in the yard in one long, practiced sweep. His eyes moved in the efficient pattern of someone trained to categorize a scene before engaging with any single part of it. 50 people standing or sitting in loose clusters. A man with dirt along one cheekbone and a twisted collar standing beside a woman with her hand resting on his arm. An older couple seated near the back door, the woman with her chin up and her tea held in both hands. And Ray Hendricks standing at the side fence with a sweet tea and the expression of a man waiting for a bus he already knew the schedule of. Kowalski stopped walking. Ray. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, but the particular recalibration that happens when a familiar variable enters an equation that had seemed straightforward a moment ago. Didn't expect to see you here. Dan. Ray set his sweet tea down on the fence post with the unhurried ease of a man at a Sunday afternoon cookout. Good timing. The second officer had moved to a position slightly behind and to the right of Kowalski's standard procedure covering angles. He was younger, maybe 30, and he was doing what young officers do at scenes that turn out to be more complicated than the dispatch summary suggested. He was watching everything and committing it to memory. Trevor stepped forward before Kowalski could process the Ray Hendricks variable any further. Officer! His voice had the shape of authority borrowed from somewhere he no longer had access to. That man right there. He pointed at me, his finger not entirely steady. Assaulted me without any warning or provocation in front of 50 witnesses. I want him arrested. I want him removed from this property immediately. This is my family's home, and he attacked me in front of my son. Kowalski looked at Trevor with the neutral, patient attention of someone who has heard a great many versions of a great many stories and has learned through long experience to wait before deciding which parts of any version are actually load-bearing. Sir, his voice was measured. I'm going to need you to slow down. Can you tell me what happened step by step, starting from the beginning? He attacked me, Trevor said. That is what happened. From the beginning, Kowalski said. The repetition was gentle. The weight behind the second word was not. Trevor started again. His version was organized and indignant, and delivered with the fluency of a man who had been composing it in his head since the moment he hit the grass. It was also missing, among other things, the word useless, spoken loudly in a yard full of guests. The step forward with the hand coming up. The 7 minutes of escalating verbal threat that had preceded any physical contact of any kind. And the moment Noah had wrapped his arms around my legs and Trevor had told me to get the boy out of the way because we were not done. When Trevor finished, Kowalski looked at Ray. You have something on this? Ray reached into his shirt pocket with the unhurried motion of a man who has been waiting for exactly this question. He took out his phone. He opened the video. 4 minutes and 32 seconds of footage shot from his position near the side fence, capturing the full width of the yard and the confrontation in its unedited entirety with the steady, practiced hand of a man who had spent 2 decades documenting things that mattered in situations where documentation was the difference between the truth being known and the truth being buried. He held the phone out to Kowalski without a word. Kowalski took it. He watched. His expression did not change, but the angle of his attention shifted somewhere in the first 45 seconds. A subtle thing, a slight forward movement of his weight. The narrowing of focus that happens when a person watching a video realizes that what they are watching is going to determine what happens next in a way that cannot be walked back. He watched all 4 minutes and 32 seconds without interruption, without comment, without looking up. Then he handed the phone back to Ray, turned to his partner, exchanged something brief and wordless, and looked at Trevor. Sir, he said, I'm going to need you to step over here with me. Trevor's confidence, which had been rebuilding itself steadily, brick by brick, since the moment he dialed 911 and felt the familiar comfort of a system he believed was designed to protect men who sounded like him, made one visible, effortful attempt to hold its shape. Then it didn't. Wait, Trevor said. His voice cracked slightly on the first word, and he did not recover it fully. Wait, you watched that video, doesn't you have to understand the context? He and I have a history. This has been building for years. He's been hostile toward me, toward my family. You can't just look at a 4-minute clip and, Sir. Kowalski's voice was not unkind. It was something more final than unkind, the voice of a decision that has already been made and is simply being communicated. Step over here, please. The yard was absolutely quiet. Even the wind, I thought, had the decency to hold still. I have watched a man's confidence leave his body before. In the military, we had a name for it, the moment when a person finally understands, at a cellular level, that the situation they believed they controlled has been controlling them all along. It is not a loud moment. It does not announce itself. It is simply the instant when a certain kind of light goes out behind the eyes and does not come back. I watched it happen to Trevor Hutchins on the grass of my backyard, and I felt nothing that resembled satisfaction. What I felt was older and quieter than the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent years hoping not to arrive at the place he always knew he was heading. Officer Kowalski had stepped Trevor to the far edge of the yard near the side fence, and was speaking to him in the measured, methodical way of a man reading items off a list. I was close enough to hear most of it. The video clearly shows you advancing toward the other party after making a verbal threat, Kowalski said. Under Georgia Code Section 16520, a verbal threat combined with the apparent ability and intent to carry it out constitutes simple assault, regardless of whether physical contact occurred first. The subsequent physical contact you initiated, your arm coming up toward the other party, is documented on video and corroborated by the statements of multiple witnesses present. Trevor's lawyer instincts, such as they were kicked in. He grabbed me. He put his hands on me. That's battery. That's... The other party has a credible claim of self-defense under Georgia Code Section 16321, Kowalski said, without changing his tone. He was responding to an imminent physical threat that you had both verbally announced and physically initiated. That is a straightforward application of Georgia's self-defense statute. Trevor stared at him. The words were landing, but the implications of them were arriving on a slight delay, the way sound arrives after lightning. You're not being fair, Trevor said. His voice had lost its shape. I have a right to defend myself. This man has been hostile toward me for years. Ask my wife. Ask Paula. Kowalski glanced toward Paula, who was standing 8 feet away. Ma'am, did you witness the altercation? Paula's jaw was tight. Her eyes moved to Trevor, then to me, then to the ground in front of her feet. Yes, she said quietly. Did your husband make verbal threats toward your father prior to any physical contact? A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. He was upset, Paula said. Things escalated. Kowalski wrote something in his notepad. He did not ask a follow-up question. He did not need to. James had been standing near the grill through all of this beer untouched at his side, watching with the focused, assessing attention of a man who makes consequential decisions for a living. When Kowalski finished writing, James set his beer down on the table beside him, buttoned the top button of his fleece vest with the deliberate composure of a person preparing to leave, and walked across the yard toward me. He stopped in front of me and put out his hand. I shook it. I'm sorry this happened in your home, Gerald, he said. His voice was low and direct and entirely without performance. I want you to know what I saw today was documented in my head, the same way Ray documented it on that phone. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he turned, walked to where Trevor was standing with Officer Kowalski, and said 4 words. We'll talk on Monday, Trevor. Not a question. Not a threat. Just a statement of inevitable fact delivered in the voice of a man who had already made the relevant decision and was simply informing the affected party. Trevor watched James walk out through the side gate. The color in his face had moved through red and arrived somewhere past it, a gray, stunned pallor that made him look suddenly much younger than 41. Kowalski read Trevor the charges. Simple assault, disorderly conduct. He explained each one in plain language, and with each explanation, Trevor seemed to compress slightly, like a structure losing load-bearing capacity from the inside. Paula stood beside her husband through all of it, with her hand at her side now no longer touching him. Her face was a controlled, careful blank that I recognized it was the face she had been practicing for years, the one she put on when she had decided not to feel whatever she was feeling, until later in private where no one could see it cost her anything. When Kowalski finished, the yard was very quiet, and then something happened that I had not anticipated and that undid me more completely than anything else that evening. People started cleaning up, not all at once. It started with Margaret, who stood up from her chair beside Dorothy, went to the nearest folding table, and began stacking paper plates. Then the couple from the end of the block joined her. Then Ray picked up a trash bag from the stack near the gate and opened it and started moving through the yard collecting cups. Then 3 of Trevor's own cousins, not his close friends, not the ones who had laughed at his stories, but the quieter ones who had watched the afternoon unfold with the discomfort of people realizing they had been guests at the wrong kind of party, began folding chairs. Within 15 minutes, my backyard was being restored by the people who had watched it be used. Dorothy sat in her chair and watched it happen with both hands wrapped around her sweet tea glass eyes, bright and wet, but not spilling over her chin, lifted in the particular way it lifted when she was holding something large inside her chest and refusing to let it break her posture. Margaret came and sat beside her again when the cleanup was mostly done. She put her hand over Dorothy's. You doing okay, Dorothy? Dorothy looked at the backyard, clean now, orderly, the folding chairs stacked neatly against the fence, the tables cleared. Her garden was still gone. Her rosemary was still in a pile near the back fence. But the yard looked for the first time all day like it belonged to someone who was cared for. "I think so," Dorothy said. Her voice was soft and steadier than I expected. "I think I might be." Paula walked out through the side gate behind Trevor without looking back. The backyard was clean by 8 o'clock that evening, cleaner than it had ever been after any party Trevor organized in my home. The folding chairs were stacked against the fence in even rows. The tables were wiped down and collapsed and leaned against the garage wall. 3 full trash bags sat neatly by the side gate. Ray had swept the patio with my broom without being asked, and Margaret had washed every serving dish Dorothy owned and left them drying in the rack beside the sink before she went home. Dorothy and I sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone. She had a cup of chamomile tea. I had coffee black even though it was past 8, and I knew it would keep me up. I did not particularly want to sleep. We did not talk about what had happened. We did not need to. 39 years of marriage means you can sit with a thing together without picking it apart, can let it settle in the room between you without demanding that it be named and categorized and resolved before you are allowed to breathe. Dorothy wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the steam rising from it. "She didn't look back," she said finally. "No," I said. "She didn't." Dorothy nodded once slowly, the way she nodded when she was confirming something she had already known for a long time and was only now giving herself permission to acknowledge. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word carrying everything. 2 days after Thanksgiving, Paula knocked on our front door. I heard the knock from the kitchen. I set down my coffee cup, walked to the front door, and opened it. Paula stood on the porch in a gray jacket, her hair pulled back, eyes red at the edges, in the way that meant she had been crying on the drive over and had tried to compose herself before getting out of the car. She looked at me for a long moment. I looked back at her. I thought about the little girl who had thrown her arms around my neck in the pink bedroom I built her. I thought about the woman in the cap and gown who had made a promise in front of our whole family. I thought about Dorothy's rosemary lying in the dirt. I thought about Noah's arms shaking against my leg. I stepped back and closed the door. Gently. Without a word. I heard her stand on the porch for a long time before her footsteps crossed the boards and went back down the steps. That evening, she sent a message. Long and careful, full of the kind of language people use when they are trying to apologize without fully examining what they are apologizing for. Dorothy read it on my phone, set it down on the counter, and looked out the kitchen window at the empty space where her herb garden used to be. She said, "Sorry, Gerald," Dorothy said. "I know," I said. Dorothy looked at the window for another moment. "Sorry doesn't put my rosemary back." She picked up her dish towel and went back to what she had been doing. The following week, Trevor sent a message of his own. It threatened legal action, a civil suit for battery and emotional distress, written in the inflated language of a man who had Googled enough legal terms to feel dangerous. I forwarded it to Ray without responding, and Ray forwarded it to Officer Kowalski, who noted it for the record. I also sent a copy to David Marsh, my attorney, who replied within the hour, given the documented video evidence and the charges currently pending against Mr. Hutchins, I would not be concerned. I was not concerned. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Trevor received a formal letter from his employer informing him that following an internal review prompted by conduct documented in a video circulated within the professional community, his position was being terminated effective immediately. James had not called it a threat when he said we'll talk on Monday. He had called it what it was, a statement of fact. A man with Trevor's education, Trevor's bravado, Trevor's absolute certainty that his credentials insulated him from consequence. Losing that job was not just a financial event. It was a structural one. The entire architecture of who he believed himself to be had been built on that position, on that title, on being the man in the room with the most letters after his name. Without it, I suspected the walls would take some time to find new shapes. I did not feel triumphant about that either. On a Saturday morning in early December, I went through the house methodically. I called a locksmith and had every exterior lock rekeyed: front door, back door, garage, side entrance. I called the bank and formally removed Paula as an authorized user on the household account she had held access to for 4 years. I called the safe manufacturer and changed the combination for the second time to a sequence I had not written down anywhere and did not intend to share with anyone except Dorothy. I did these things in order, calmly, the way I had done difficult things all my life, one item at a time, without rushing, without drama. When I was done, I sat at the kitchen table and drank a glass of water. Then I went to the living room and took down the framed photograph of Paula and Trevor from their wedding, the one that had hung beside the graduation picture for 5 years, and I placed it face down in a cardboard box in the hall closet. I did not throw it away. I was not ready to decide what it meant yet, but I was not able to look at it. The graduation picture stayed on the wall. Paula's promise. June 2009. I was not ready to take that one down either. January came. The new year arrived the way New Year's do, quietly, with no fanfare, just one morning waking up and the calendar having changed. Dorothy planted seeds in small plastic trays on the kitchen windowsill, getting a head start on the spring garden. She had already ordered new rosemary from a nursery catalog had folded down the corner of the page. One morning in late January, I went out to the front porch to get the newspaper and found something wedged under the edge of Dorothy's ceramic flower pot by the front step. A small folded square of paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook. I picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was large and uneven, and unmistakably a child's letters formed with the careful effort of someone still learning that each one has a specific shape that has to be honored. There was a drawing at the bottom of this page. 2 figures, one tall and one small, standing beside something that might have been a tree or might have been a broom. Under the drawing, in the particular earnest orthography of a 7-year-old, who has something important to say and is determined to say it correctly. I miss you, Grandpa. I am sorry for what Dad did. Love, Noah. I stood on the front porch in the January cold for a long time. Then I folded that piece of paper in half and placed it in the breast pocket of my jacket directly over my heart and went inside. That evening, Dorothy and I had dinner at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us. She had made pot roast, the kind that takes all day, that fills the whole house with the smell of it by 2 in the afternoon. She had set the table with the good placemats, the ones she usually saved for company, and put a small candle in the middle. We sat down across from each other. I reached across the table and poured her tea. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. "This is nice, Gerald." she said softly. I looked at her, at the silver in her hair, at the lines around her eyes, at the woman who had stood in January cold to warm up a car she should never have had to park outside, who had planned her spring garden from a catalog while her rosemary lay in the dirt, who had said sorry, doesn't put my rosemary back, and gone back to doing the dishes. Yeah, I said. It is Dorothy. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. It really is. I have told you everything now. Every borrowed tool that was never returned. Every electric bill that doubled without apology. Every evening I watched Noah fall asleep in Dorothy's arms because his parents had somewhere better to be. Every moment Paula chose silence when I needed her voice. I do not tell you this story for sympathy. I tell it because I spent 5 years confusing tolerance with love, and they are not the same thing. Tolerance without boundaries is not kindness. It is an open door that the wrong people will walk through every single time, and they will keep walking through it until you close it yourself. I believe God gives every man a moment of clarity. Mine came on a kitchen floor, holding my wife after she fell watching my daughter walk out the door. That moment did not break me. It built me back into something I had almost forgotten, the man I was before I started making myself smaller to keep the peace. My personal opinion earned the hard way. A man who lets his family be mistreated in the name of keeping the peace will lose both his family and his peace. Do not wait as long as I waited. The people who truly love you will never ask you to shrink yourself to make room for someone else's arrogance. If any part of this grand pastories resonated with you, if you have ever been taken advantage of by someone, you opened your home and your heart to leave a comment below and tell me your story. These family revenge and revenge story moments remind us all that dignity is worth protecting no matter how late the hour. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this one speak to you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. One final note, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and life lessons. If that is not the content for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what fits your heart better. But if you are still here, I am glad you stayed. So am I, Dorothy. So am I.